and Lomachenko. Is that a serious thing? Could we seriously see that happen?
Inoue is a big fighter, a big kid. He's 118 now. Loma's really a featherweight. Loma, I think, would go down to 126 to fight Inoue, a year from now. Yeah, sure, that's a great fight.
Have you spoken to Vasily about moving down to 126 in specific to fight Inoue?
Vasily, once he wins, if he wins the unified title next year, will fight the best fighter available at any given time between 126 and 135. If, for example, Davis is ready to step in the ring with him, and at 130 or 135, he'll be there. Loma will be there. Inoue is a very attractive fight at 126. Valdez is an attractive fight. You have to understand, Vasily is essentially a 126-pound featherweight, essentially. And therefore, we have the great flexibility of moving him around among the three divisions.
That's out of the horse's mouth. That Bob Arum means to move Vasyl Lomachenko around to face whatever the best available fighter may be at any given time, anywhere from 126 to 135. That could potentially pit him against Gervonta Davis, though I'm not holding my breath. That could potentially pit him against Oscar Valdez. That could potentially pit him against Naoya Inoue. But it is the name of Naoya Inoue that got my attention in regards to this story. Understand, folks, I'm a big proponent of the best versus the best. But I'm a big proponent of the best versus the best when they are both at their best. And the idea that Naoya Inoue would find himself at 126 pounds in only a year's time to fight the likes of Vasyl Lomachenko, I'm sorry, but I am not a proponent of such a proposition. I do not feel that Naoya Inoue would be at his best at that particular weight, given where he is right now, at 118 pounds. I mean, he's still got a
unify
good amount of options right there at 118. He's got a potential Ubali fight. He's got a potential Zolani Tete fight. And with those two fights, he could potentially become an undisputed champion. Quality fights, those fights, and they're all right there at 118 pounds. They're entirely doable because, Tete is a Frank Warren guy. Frank Warren's in bed with Top Rank and ESPN. There's an avenue of opportunity to make those fights. Ubali, he is receptive to a Naoya Inoue fight. MTK Global Fighter. Those fights can happen. And neither of them would require Naoya Inoue to make such a broad jump from 118 to 126. I mean, you'd be skipping past an entire weight class. 122. I don't like the idea of that fight because for all I know, 122 might actually be Naoya Inoue's ceiling. That might be where the buck stops. But 126, you might be asking too much of the man. We look over at Vasyl Lomachenko, and this is just my opinion. Feel free to disagree. But I don't know that Vasyl Lomachenko would even be at his best at 126, it being that he has since moved up to 130 and to 135. Thus, if you ask me, given what I've been seeing, well, I feel like right now, Vasyl Lomachenko's best weight is actually 130. And if Vasyl Lomachenko can still make 130, and he is so willing to do it, well, there are good fights right there that wouldn't require the likes of Naoya Inoue to make some kind of a huge jump. There are good fights right there that Top Rank can make between Vasyl Lomachenko and Jamel Herring, or Vasyl Lomachenko and Miguel Berchelt. They would be world title opportunities. They could eventually result in unification matches. I like any one of those two fights, Loma versus Herring or Loma versus Berchelt, more than I like the idea of Loma versus Naoya Inoue. I don't view that as an even playing field for both of the fighters. I just don't. And I'm a firm believer in the best versus the best, but when they are at their best. I don't believe Naoya Inoue would be at his best at 126, where he hasn't done anything yet, and I don't even think in a year's time he will have done anything yet at that weight. He's still got unfinished business at 118, let alone 122, let alone 126, okay? I mean, you're asking too much of the man. Now, as far as Vasyl Lomachenko's newfound flexibility, that he might be fighting anywhere from 135 to 126, that's bittersweet news. I mean, it does have a silver lining, but there are a dark set of clouds that follow it also. That's essentially saying that Vasyl Lomachenko, in the very near future, could be seeing himself leaving the 135-pound division and what belts he has collected behind. Belts that the likes of a Gervonta Davis might end up picking up. That's right. And so long as a Gervonta Davis is holding on to those belts, or a belt, a full version of a title, well, that's a belt that's likely going to get held hostage. I mean, we know what's going on. You know, right now, the news is that Gervonta Davis is going to be fighting Yuriorkis Gamboa for what is a WBA baby belt. Now put your thinking caps on, kids. In all likelihood, Davis wins that fight, gets that baby belt. Thereafter, if Vasyl Lomachenko decides to move down and relinquishes the full version of the title he's holding, well, guess who's going to be elevated to full WBA champion? The holder of the baby belt. And who's that likely to be? Gervonta fucking Davis. I mean, that's the part of this news that I don't like, that this opens the door for him to pick up at least one of those world titles and hold it hostage in all the ways he held the WBA title hostage at 130. You know, right now they've pretty much got a lid on the situation. All the major titles are out of arm's reach when it comes to Gervonta Davis, because he's not going to fight the winner of Commey versus Lopez, and he's not going to fight Vasyl Lomachenko anytime in the near future, if at all. So that prevents this PBC fighter from holding a world title hostage. We don't have to worry about that, at least not right now. But Vasyl leaves the division, well, that opens the door for him to pick at least one or two of them up. Yeah, it could happen. Not too happy about that, I'm not. I've said it before, I'll say it again. The less world titles that end up in the clutches of a PBC fighter, the better. Because if one so happens to end up in the clutches of a PBC fighter, they're going to hold it hostage. There are lots of world champions out there, many of which are with different promoters, different organizations that have dealings with different networks. And you know, some promoters, they're about making the best fights between the best fighters, whereas a PBC fighter, you want to operate as an island. So the less world titles that end up on that island, the better. Now back to Vasyl Lomachenko's newfound flexibility and what I think is motivating the move. Well, I think that this is an attempt to extend his career. Understand that Vasyl Lomachenko is a great fighter, but he did get off to a late start, and he's no spring chicken. 135 has not been as kind to him as, say, 130 or 126. I mean, he's winning, and he's winning in great fashion, no doubt about it, but we can see that the discrepancy in size between himself and some other fighters, it does have a role to play. The overall wear and tear that he may sustain facing naturally bigger guys. I think that what's motivating this move to potentially move downstairs anywhere from 130 to 126 is in the best interest of extending his career. Not dissimilar from what we saw from Nonito Donaire very recently. Nonito Donaire, who went all the way back down to 118, having not fought there in roughly 6-7 years, something like that. I mean, I wondered how he would arrive at the weight, him not having fought there in such a long time. I wondered that it wouldn't affect his performance, that he wouldn't be drained as a result. But we saw how he looked against Inoue. He looked fantastic. I mean, give the man his credit. He looked great. And because of that, you know, him making that move, entering in the World Boxing Super Series as a bantamweight, well, that allowed him to pile up at least 2 wins before losing to Naoya Inoue. In that way, the move itself extended his career, and I think that's more or less the hierarchy of thought when it comes to Vasyl Lomachenko. That 135 is definitely a weight where he can fight, he can still win. It's not asking too much of him, but the fights there, they are a little bit harder. The guys, they are a little bit bigger, you know, so they want to get the most mileage out of this late guy, this late bloomer, I should say, because Vasyl Lomachenko went pro at a late age. You know, he had an extended amateur background, and there's no such thing as a free lunch. All those years that he spent as an amateur, you know, competed in the Olympics 1-2 times, but all those years they did come at a cost.
That and everything.
That's more or less what I think is motivating the move. In truth, not so much against Vasyl Lomachenko fluctuating in weight, looking for the best available fights with the best available fighters, anywhere from 135 to 126. It's just that, you know what? Vasyl Lomachenko is the biggest name anywhere at 135.
Or 130.
Or 126, or 130. Who in those weight classes has a bigger name than the name of Vasyl Lomachenko? Nobody. So from where I'm sitting, it kind of feels like, you know what, if any one of those guys at 126, 130, 135, if they want to challenge Vasyl Lomachenko, they should have to move up to him because he's the A side. Why does he have to fluctuate in weight? And that more or less answers the question that it's not about, you know, just
landing opponents,
getting fights, because he can get fights. He's the biggest name anywhere at or around those weight classes. So it's not just getting fights, it's also extending his career to lessen the physical toll being at 135 specifically, lessen the toll it takes on his body. It's for this reason I think they're moving him up and down in weight, or they mean to extend his career, because it can't be about getting fights. He can get fights.
LAS move up.
He's the A side to anybody from 135 to 130 to 126. So if any one of those guys really want to fight him, well, you better move your ass up, because he's the A side, you know? So I just don't think it's about getting fights. I think it's about extending his career. In other news, Michael Benson tweeted a post-fight quote from the former WBO light heavyweight champion Sergey Kovalev, who claims consecutive camps hindered him versus Canelo. He's quoted as saying, given the conditions, it was impossible to win. You're ignoramuses since you thought I could win. I climbed into this weight with torment and sleepless nights because it was a financially interesting offer. And this is a very different demeanor, a very different perspective than what Sergey Kovalev told the media before the fight. Before the fight, he said he liked the consecutive camps, that he was already in shape and that everybody was relaxed, and it wasn't a question of if he would win, but when he would win. Whereas now he's done a full 180, and he's basically saying he never had a chance. Tell you the truth, that these quotes read a lot like excuses. The same kind of excuses that Sergey Kovalev used in the Andre Ward fights. You know, claiming he was being hit low when anybody with a set of eyes could have seen that those were belt line shots, okay? And you just don't like it there. So your coping mechanism for dealing with those belt line shots is to cry foul when, well, you can see that's what's not going on. Tony Weeks didn't go for it. I didn't go for it, you know? Now, Sergey Kovalev and his fans, he did have his enablers claiming that, yeah, Andre Ward's a dirty fighter, but you're just making excuses for this guy the same way Sergey was making excuses for himself. And we see that, you know, he's still doing it. He's still doing it. You know, where before the fight, you're telling everybody you like the short camp, you feel great, everybody's relaxed. You actually like the short camp because you're already in shape. Now you're saying you never stood a chance, and anybody that thought you did is an ignoramus. Well, you're the motherfucker that told everybody that you were going to win, okay? It's funny because I actually think that Sergey's telling the truth. I actually believe that the short camp might have hindered him more than it helped him, given that, you know, Sergey Kovalev's not the same fighter that he used to be. He's not the crusher anymore. He's not that durable guy. And while he may still have a high boxing acumen, there's only so much that this declining fighter can take. Thus,
A short camp
ahead of a fight with Canelo Alvarez, it might have actually hurt him. It's just that, given Sergey's contradictory nature, the fact that what he said before the fight doesn't align with what he's saying after the fight, it does read like excuses. There was a lot made of Sergey's performance in that fight.
He threw it.
Some people thought he threw it. Some people thought it was fixed.
It's a conspiracy, man.
And, you know, I mean, it's not outside the realm of possibility that something like that could have happened. I mean, let's not kid ourselves, you know.
It's happened before.
There have been fixed fights in the past, so you don't have to rule it out. It's just that I'm not of that school of thought. I saw Sergey's performance as a safety-first performance coming from a guy who's not as durable as he used to be. Thus, he's got to be very careful what he's putting out there. That he's definitely fighting behind his jab, and there's no bad intentions behind it because he's in there with a younger guy with a fresher set of reflexes, fast hands, quick counters, and Sergey, you know, he's not what he used to be. He can't afford to get hit with a punch that he doesn't see, and that's very much what could happen if he's not careful. That was my explanation for Sergey being stopped in the way that he was stopped and putting on the performance that he put on. And what he's saying here in regards to the physical toll that the short camp had on him, that aligns with what I was thinking, that, yeah, this guy physically, he's not holding up too good. He can still box. I mean, he's definitely a good boxer, but in the realm of physicality, Sergey is not durable anymore. And that's basically what he's expressing. So I do think he's telling the truth. But you might be asking yourselves right now, well, how could he be telling the truth and making excuses at the same time? How could he do this simultaneously? Well, you know, ahead of the fight, you don't expect a guy to say, I'm a little bit more vulnerable now because I've had a short camp. You don't expect him to say this in the build-up because the way the fans would interpret it is as preemptive excuses. That, oh, you're just making excuses. You're going to go in there, you're going to lay down. You don't want to give people off that impression in the build-up of a fight that you're trying to sell. You can't say that. So you say the opposite. You say, I like the short camp. It was good. I feel great. You say that in the build-up because you're trying to sell this thing. I get it. It's just that no matter how you slice it, it is a contradiction. What you were saying before the fight don't match what you're saying after the fight. Sergey Kovalev described the conditions for the Canelo Alvarez fight as impossible for him to win. And where it becomes an excuse is that no matter what the conditions were, you're the one that decided to take them, and you made it known why you fought the fight under those conditions, due to the money. In that way, you made your bed, now you gotta lie in it. You can't cry about it after when you're the one who accepted this fight under those conditions. That's what makes it an excuse, folks. Sergey knew what he was getting into, so you can't complain about it afterwards and call people ignoramuses for believing what you led them to believe.
The guys who thought he would win.
No, I wasn't one of those people. I didn't pick Sergey to win this thing, thus I am not one of these ignoramuses that he is describing. But better still, this was an opportunity for Sergey to simply show some character. Don't make any excuses for it. Suck it up. You accepted this fight under those circumstances, and as a result, you ended up losing the fight. It is what it is. You lose it, you move on. But what does Sergey do? He makes excuses.